Honorable Chair and honorable members of the Senate and Committee on Peace and Security. The Zimbabwe Renewable Energy Policy was launched in 2019. Why did we launch a renewable energy policy at a time when we already had a general energy policy? When we launched the initial energy policy in 2012, Honorable Chair and members, we realized that there was need for us to have a focused policy which deals with issues of renewable energy, given that at that time there were also a lot of new technologies which were coming up, and there was need for us to also respond to climate change issues to ensure that we increase our own renewable energy into the mix. The technologies at the time, they were still kind of very expensive, but we believed that having a policy will then help us to prepare in advance to be able to then take on these technologies into our energy mix. At the time when the energy policy was launched, the renewable energy policy was launched, we had a number of renewable energy plants within our energy mix. We had hydro, which has always been one of our biggest areas of supply, especially through Kariba power station, which really constituted almost up to 50% of our own supply into the energy mix. Obviously, most of our power was coming from Wage power station, and we also had other small hydros which we had already built, but insignificant in amounts. And we also had one of our areas where maybe it's not said much is the biofuels side, where we produce power from biofuels using bagasse, which is a byproduct, which is a waste material from sugarcane. But we also produced some ethanol, which is also a renewable energy product which is used to mandatorily mixed with petrol to green up our fuel, but also to reduce our import budget related to the petroleum side. So your questions were very clear in terms of what strategies have we put into because the policy, when we set it up, it had key areas where we needed to work on. The first one was to set up some policy targets, because when you have a policy without targets, then you are not sure where you're going. So within that policy, we set up some targets to say that by 2025, we all wanted to achieve about 1.1, which is 1,100 megawatts in terms of capacity, forming about 16% of our energy mix, and then with the view of increasing that to 2,100 by 2030. And when I'm speaking to these figures, I'm then excluding some of the large hydro in that mix, because when it comes to hydro, we are already over 1,100, almost 1,090 megawatts, which is already installed in the country. So some of the other targets, we're looking at small hydro, where we're targeting about 150 megawatts, and then grid solar. We wanted to install up to about 1,575 megawatts, and wind, we were initially within our policy targeting about 100 megawatts. The policy also looked at bringing in private sector participation, and we put in some form of incentives which we were going to use as a way of attracting private sector. And some of the incentives came up with the exemption of the renewable energy technologies from duty payments, and we were also putting in tax incentives related to tax holidays, and also looking at how we can ensure that part of the regulatory conditions are then reduced to ensure that these technologies are then taken on board. So since your question was to say from the time we actually started, where are we with some of these? We have submitted a report, Honorable Chair, which then says out of the 150 we have achieved about 41.5 megawatts in the small hydro space. We still have other small hydros which we expect to come in, and we will update the committee as we install them going forward. In the solar space, for that which we have already recorded in terms of the solar plants which are supplying the grid, we have about 101.9 megawatts, but we also have a lot of small solar programs which are incorporated into the current grid using net metering, and we have another 100 megawatts which is coming through that system. So we will ask the different institutions which are implementing this policy to give us actual figures in terms of where they are, what they've been able to incorporate into the grid, and how they are doing that. The other issue which we spoke to, Honorable, is the fact that there are other renewable energy technologies, maybe which we don't speak about quite a lot, related to cooking, especially when we talk about clean cooking. We have a program for biodigesters which have been instituted, mainly driven by our renewable energy, our rural electrification agency, but also with the private sector playing a significant role in the implementation of these biodigester systems, especially related to the ones where we are doing the institutions of government with a full rebate, where we build for schools and other big institutions which have a reasonable animal population, to ensure that they adopt the technology. And we will also speak to how we are ensuring that that technology is taken on board through capacitation of different people within the rural areas. In each area where we go to build biodigesters, the Rural Electrification Agency, together with the ministry, do a training program for builders. The idea is, once we leave your province, Honorable Chair, you should have builders who can build biodigesters in that province, and the people can benefit from that. So that's one program which we are doing. The other area where we have been working quite hard was the solar water heating side, where we have seen that within the domestic space, a lot of heat is used, a lot of power is used to heat water throughout the day for the geysers, and we have come up with a strategy where we have, together with the Minister of Local Government, said any new buildings which are coming up should install solar water heaters instead of using electric heaters, except in high-rise buildings where we know that the space is insufficient, especially if it's an accommodation space to allow for all the households to have solar. So you see that in a lot of new developments, solar water heating is one of the methods which the households are using to ensure that they heat up their water for their home use. I spoke about net metering, which will then be addressed by ZESA. So what have we managed to achieve? I think through ZERA, we have come up with the regulations for licensing new projects related to the renewable energy technologies. And from those, we have also come up and reduced the regulatory costs related to renewable energy projects. I think the latest revision has been the one which was done late last year, where we totally removed the cost of licensing any projects which are below 10 megawatts from any licensing fees. So the idea was to say, how do we allow private sector and remove any barriers to entry, and especially upfront costs? And one of those was to remove the regulatory costs, allow them to register through the regulator, and ensure that they also meet the minimum safety requirements as they build their plants. We have also, as government, come up with a project support agreement, which is really meant to allow for the developers to have a power purchase agreement with ZETDC, which, if they fail to pay, then they can come to government as a guarantor to ensure that they are paid for whatever they would have supplied to ZETDC. But we have never had to call on this guarantee because ZETDC has been meeting their obligations related to the power purchase agreements, especially for the solar and the renewable energy projects which have been implemented in the country. But also to allow for ZETDC to be capacitated to do so, we also increased, and through the regulator, they were given a cost-reflective tariff, which allows them to collect sufficient revenues to pay their suppliers. And they've also been migrating towards prepaid metering, so that they are able to collect their money upfront, having had challenges of collections in the past as a way of revenue assurance. We have also looked at the expansion of the solar projects, including the solar home system, the grid-connected systems, especially in rural areas. I think the private sector has been doing a lot of work where they have been selling the products for the different types of renewables. We have seen a significant reduction in the cost of products, Madam Chair, which has also helped for people, for the uptake of the renewable energy. But whilst the solar project costs were coming down, we were also having challenges with quality. So you realize that what we have done is we've come up with standards for the quality of our solar products and accessories to ensure that these are of a proper standard with certain mandatory guarantees. And we will be looking at the statutory instruments which were supporting this policy position. And then the framework in terms of what the regulator is doing and how they've improved on the regulatory frameworks, the regulator will come in and speak to that. Then what are we doing to ensure that the renewable energy access is increased? One of the issues which has happened over the past 2 years is that whilst the rest of the world have been able to achieve universal access where everyone does have access to modern energy, especially electricity, including through renewables, Africa has remained behind with about 600 million of people who don't have access to energy. And the Zimbabwe is one of those countries within Africa which has gone on to commit to ensuring that we achieve universal access by 2030, where the World Bank and the African Development Bank have said, yes, we have 600 million people who don't have access, but let's work with 300 million so that we have that number for the African continent by 2030. And we will then work with the governments to ensure that they get supported for them to implement what was then referred to as energy compacts. So Zimbabwe also does have an energy compact, which we launched last year. The compact is 5 pillars. The first pillar is that of ensuring that we increase and expand our capacity in terms of generation capacity from all forms of energy, including the non-renewable ones. And we are also looking at the network infrastructure expansion, which is key to ensure that we meet our national targets for the access. The second pillar of our energy compact is that of leveraging on integration of the energy systems within the region. I'm sure you are aware that we are connected to the region through the Southern African Power Pool, and we can export and import power into the country to supplement our energy needs from time to time. And we believe that that pillar is important so that if we install much more than we need, we can be also able to export to the region. The third pillar, which is critical for this meeting, is that of embracing distributed renewable energy systems and clean cooking solutions for affordable last mile access. For us, honorable members, access to energy is critical in the case that I'm sure we are all clear that our mantra for the president is that we leave no place and no area behind, no person behind. And through the pillar 3, we have, through our rural electrification agency, been distributing the renewable energy solutions to our schools, to our clinics, together with our partners, and also through the private sector. So we will speak to what we have achieved. So that's why I brought them here. They implement policy. They will tell you how many schools have been electrified using the renewable energy solutions, how many clinics have been done, and what else are we going to do going forward to ensure that we embrace these technologies. And also related to that is the clean cooking solutions, which include both the issue which I spoke to, use of biodigesters in terms of biofuels, but we are also looking at the use of LPG gas, looking at use of electricity, looking at use of efficient cook stoves which still use biomass as a way of ensuring that we have access to clean cooking solutions. The fourth pillar is to incentivize private sector participation to unlock additional resources. And I think this we have done through the reduction of the license fees, through the licensing of the private sector, but the Minister of Finance also introduced the what we refer to as the prescribed asset status, so that our insurance companies can also invest in the renewable energy space. We believe that we need to do more in that area so that we attract more funding. But we have seen that a lot of the projects which have been implemented in the private sector have been able to access insurance funding through the prescribed asset status. And we also have a renewable energy fund which we have launched. The fifth pillar is that of ensuring that we have a viable utility. In this case, I've spoken already to the fact that the tariff for our utility has been adjusted to ensure that it's cost reflective, but also on their side, they've come up with mechanisms to assure their revenue collection through the prepaid meters and also the use of smart metering programs. Our current access is at about 62%, so we still have about 38% of our population which will be electrified and given the modern energy access through the programs which we have identified within the Energy Compact. We will distribute the Energy Compact to the members. It's available electronically. We'll make sure before the end of today you get that copy. It will identify all the different pillars I've spoken to, what are the challenges and how we are actually addressing them. So we will make sure that you get this compact. We have also developed a National Integrated Energy Resource Plan. The plan is looking at how we are going to supply energy into the country using the National resources we have, and it goes up to 2045. That plan is soon to be submitted to Cabinet for approval, but what it does is it identifies our growth in the different sectors of the economy, mining, agriculture, industry, and it then looks at how best we can bring in additional capacity at least cost, and it evaluates continuously through an iterative process the energy security issues related to the energy mix we have. And as a country, we have resolved that we will use all energy forms we have available to us, including the use of thermal sources related to the use of coal and gas. And we are already working with private sector who are also building their own plants, not as independent power producers who want to just sell to the grid, but also for their own energy use, which we call captive power plants. And we have seen a lot of those which have come up in the last 2 years, and we are expecting more plants. Actually, this morning we were meeting one of the private sector developers who is developing 2 plants, and we expect one of them to be coming in before the end of this year, a 20 megawatt solar plant. And they are also building a 2 by 50 megawatt thermal plants, which will be mainly used to supply their own smelters, and that will then support the value addition program of government to ensure that all metals which are produced in this country have some form of value addition before they can be exported. So we are working quite closely with this, and we have seen one of the biggest growth in that area where captive power plants are being built, with any excess being then supplied to ZESA, who will then distribute it to the rest of the grid. We are also looking at another strategy where we are looking at the rolling out of mini grids. I'll ask Ref to speak to what we are doing in that energy space, because we are saying 62% have been connected to the systems, whether using off-grid systems or on-grid. But we are also looking at some villages which are quite a distance from the grid, and we are saying for those villages we can do mini grids for them, which will then supply both their economic activities and also the schools, clinics, and homesteads. We have done a number of these mini grids in different provinces, and the aim was for Rural Electrification Fund to lead the pilot projects, but with the private sector coming in to support and do the other systems so that we fast track the electrification program. We have also developed a national energy efficiency policy. Why energy efficiency? Is because renewable energy systems, for you to size them efficiently and well, you need efficient systems. And I think for you who have these in homes where you have installed some, you realize that if you don't have a big system and you don't have efficient lighting, you don't have efficient gadgets in your house, you will not be able to use renewable energy effectively. You will then need to buy a bigger system. So energy efficiency is another policy which we launched last year. It supports our energy policy, but it also supports very closely the renewable energy policy, because when you're now able to use efficient lighting, you don't have to develop a very big system for you to meet your needs, even in the home. That's why we are saying use LED lighting, use efficient lighting, and we removed some of the incandescent lighting as a way of ensuring that people who want to put up their own systems can then put reasonably priced systems to support their operations. One other area which we are working on together with the Ministries of Transport and Environment is that of electric mobility. We have developed a framework which we'll be taking through the cabinet soon, where we are looking at encouraging the use of electric mobility, whether as tricycles or two-wheelers or public buses and private vehicles. And we have seen a lot of improvement in this area in terms of technologies and vehicles. Maybe previously we used to have smaller vehicles being electric vehicles, mainly sedans and SUVs. But now you have seen that electric mobility applies to even big trucks, not just for the likes for transporting people and moving goods, but we can also now deal with effectively mobility in mines using electric vehicles, which is important, especially now that we have these companies setting up their own energy systems. They can save on the energy use by ensuring that during the night, when they have their own plants, they can charge their own fleet during the night. And we have seen one of our own, which is CMED, which has really moved on to adopt both electric vehicles, small electric cars. I think they have one of the biggest fleets in the country in terms of moving towards the use of this electric mobility. But for most of the small cars, those we have been selling electric vehicles, we're also giving them solar panels, so that if you have your own solar panel during the day when your car is parked, you can actually charge it using renewable energy. And we believe that strategy works well. We have also developed a clean cooking strategy, Madam Chair, which we will be presenting, basically looking at how best we support the rural communities and peri-urban communities to move away from the use of sustainable use of firewood to use the other cleaner ways of cooking. And we will be seeking your support as we launch the strategy, which is meant to ensure that we reduce the use of firewood currently, especially in rural communities, from about, I think we were looking at access to clean energy at 38%, and we want to move that to, especially for cooking, for clean cooking, instead of using basic firewood. So when it comes to progress, we have done a number of systems through the private sector, through our Rural Electrification Fund, but we have one of the big systems which will be coming in and will soon be launched, which is the Presidential Rural Solarization Scheme, which is meant to install over 1.2 million 1 kilowatt solar systems. These are already under procurement and are being installed in some of our rural communities using the RIDA, which is the Rural Infrastructure Development Authority under the Office of the President and Cabinet. We have already spoken to the issue of mini grids. I'll ask Ria to speak to those. And the issue of regulations, we will just have a summary from Zera in terms of where we are with the regulations and how we have improved that environment. And then we also have a lot of collaboration between ourselves and the NGOs. I think one of the biggest programs in Africa has been that of the UNDP program for Solar for Health. I think we have over 1,000 both rural and urban clinics and hospitals which have the renewable energy installed, mainly for backup, but for some, that's their basic requirement which they use. And also I want to speak to the issue of capacity building, that as the ministry, through our agencies, I spoke to the capacity building of some of our builders in rural areas, but we are also building capacity through the regulator, where they are building capacity to train installers of these renewable energy technologies to ensure that they install them properly. Because at times a technology is rejected not because it doesn't work, But if it's not installed properly, it can actually make people not like it, because they'll say, oh, these solar things, they don't last. But it's because they've not been installed properly, and two, they might not be of the right quality. So through our regulator, we have come up with clear standards, minimum standards for these systems, and we have also been running courses over the years, because it was one of the issues which I discovered as a regulator, why there were challenges with people accepting the technology. It's because most of them were not being installed properly. And also, if it's not installed properly, we have also seen unsafe issues happening where people are electrocuted, or if the batteries, especially lithium-ion batteries, are not installed properly, houses can go up in smoke and fire because the batteries can catch fire. So it's important that we train and capacitate people who install these systems, and we have a whole program which we are doing that. And we are also putting in a statutory instrument to make sure that if you are to be an installer, you have to have these qualifications. We've also spoken through ZimDef into developing a curriculum for our colleges, which allows them to train solar technicians. And this is an area. And last but not least, one of the areas we have put in the financial incentives, mainly tax incentives, where the duties have been removed to ensure that we're able to bring in the technologies. But if you look at our renewable energy policy, we also want to encourage the establishment of, I'll call them factories, which can, maybe we start by assembling these renewable energy technologies and also maybe actually producing them locally. And I'll ask Ref to speak to the program which we are doing through them, where we want to establish a 60 megawatt production plant which will then assemble the products here locally in Zimbabwe. And we have done a feasibility study to that effect, and we are looking for partners, because when we talk about new technologies, what is critical is that we need to develop capacity to make sure that those technologies come up with some local components, madam, where we can use our own minerals, in the case of lithium, where we can use for some of the infrastructure for the solar stand, the ground-mounted systems. Once the iron and steel industry is up and running, we should be using that locally produced iron and steel to do those stands which we use for our ground-mounted systems. So it's some of those issues that the policy also addresses as part of the issues. And then I'm now moving to point number 3. I realize I've been talking continuously. Maybe members might want to ask questions. And I would like to stop here and pause, madam, and allow you to come in, and maybe we then have an interactive section.
Perhaps the way we should proceed is we'll allow you to finish the presentation. And if at all your members would like to add, they can do in addition to your presentation. Committee members here are taking note of your presentation and jotting down areas of, if they have questions and clarification.
So I would like to move on to point number 3, where you were asking what are the measures in place to address the development of these projects, especially regarding risks related to projects. And I think earlier on I alluded to the issue of the project support agreement, which is meant to de-risk issues relating to currency convertibility and issues to do with tariffs, and also related to the power purchase agreement. I've already spoken to what we have done in terms of through the regulator allowing for cost-reflective tariffs, but also through as part of the package related to the government project support agreement, we have what we call the letter of comfort, which comes from the Reserve Bank, related to those project promoters who would want to be assured that once they invest the money in the country, they sell the energy, they are then able to repatriate their profits and also loan repayments to their countries of origin. So that project implementation agreement is really meant to de-risk, especially the big projects which we are implementing. And the other issue as part of the project support agreement, we have a standard PPA, a power purchase agreement. This allows for people who want to come to Zimbabwe, when they come to visit us as a ministry and say, if I want to set up a power plant, how am I going to sell the power and what are the conditions related to that? That standard power purchase agreement we developed with the assistance of the African Development Bank and the players within the sector, which is the TTDC, ZERA, Ministry of Finance, Reserve Bank, and ourselves. We came up with a standard document which can be used by developers so that they appreciate what is expected from this country. And then the other vulnerabilities and institutional frameworks, I think I've spoken to the fact that whilst the ministry formulates policy and plans in the sector and coordinates the implementation, and we also report to you and to government, we have other institutions which are part of the implementation of this strategy. And that's the Rural Electrification Fund, we have ZERA, we also have ZETDC, because when you bring in independent power producers, they would want to sell that power to someone who can pay them. So these are the ones which I'll call on Madam to just speak to the issues. I spoke to the reduction of license fees as part of the de-risking of projects, the tariff reform where we've allowed them to charge reasonable tariffs as part of the de-risking mechanisms, and then the incentives related to some of the policies related to the mini grids, the energy efficiency. I've spoken to all those issues. So when we talk to those institutions, I'll ask ZERA to come in first, then followed by the other two, given that the regulator is the key implementing agent of this policy. Some of the challenges which we have faced in the past, there was a perception that our policies are inconsistent, they keep changing, the tariffs were not, people were not able to predict, but we have done what we call the tariff methodology, which ZERA has developed. So if a developer wants to come in here and they go to the regulator, they'll be told, if you want to come up with a tariff for your plant, this is the methodology which we use, so that you don't second guess to say, how do I calculate the cost of my power? So these are some of the areas which we had previously, but are systems which we have put in place. The issue of shortage of technical skills for designing, implementing, and monitoring renewable energy projects. We have been going through intensive capacity building, both from the International Renewable Energy Agency and also the International Solar Alliance, where we have sent our staff from the ministry, from the regulator, and also from ZTTDC to do an appreciation of what needs to be done to incorporate the renewable energy into our own systems with minimum challenges. And also, one of the areas where we have been doing a lot of work is in wind. We don't have a lot of wind projects, yet in the past, if you remember, Madam Chair, most of our water pumping in farms was done using windmills. But over time, that technology has not been sort of continued. We want to bring back, but these are much bigger wind turbines, which are set up at 180 meters, 120 to 80 to 120 meters high. So as a government, we are doing a wind resource assessment in about 8 sites where we have identified potential wind for us to set up wind turbines and include wind into our energy mix. There's complementarity between the renewable energy technologies. You realize that whilst the solar, you can only use it for 6 to 8 hours depending on the length of the day, wind tends to increase at night. So we want to actually bring in these technologies so that they complement each other. When the solar is off, the sun, it will never shine at night. The wind will then come in to complement the production because our demand is mainly at night. So a lot of people have asked, why are you not putting more solar? We need to put in more solar, but one of the areas where we need to invest in, where the cost had not gone significantly lower, was in the use of battery storage systems. But we have seen a reduction in the past 2 years where the cost of batteries has gone down by more than 40%, which is quite significant. So you find that even your own batteries in solar home systems, where people used to buy 100 AH batteries for $1,000, they are now between $600 or so. And that's a huge reduction. And it happened within 2 years, that reduction. So it's important to say that we see how, but we are also working with the utility to ensure that they put up systems which will allow their network to remain stable even when they incorporate higher levels of renewables. The biggest challenges with renewables is that they are variable. When you talk about solar, it will only be during the day, and if it's cloudy, it comes down. When you talk about wind, there are some times when it doesn't blow, so you have to look for an area which will have continuous wind streams going through those. So because they are variable, and when we talk about hydro as an energy source, the biggest challenge with hydro is climate change and droughts. When we have serious droughts like we had in the past 5 years, you then suddenly feel very vulnerable, even though we have one of our biggest power plants being a hydro plant. So these are some of the challenges, Madam Chair, which come with these technologies, but we believe we can climate-proof them by making sure that our mix, our energy mix, includes gas, it includes hydro, it includes solar, it includes wind. When we mix them up in that format, we then climate-proof them and allow them to work together harmoniously, including the introduction of large-scale battery systems, which I'll ask Cesar to speak to. Then there is also the biggest challenge we've had in the past was access to financing, and not just financing, but low-cost financing for infrastructure. And that area we have seen for small plants, they've had access to insurance funds, they've had access to some of the donor-funded and grants, but our banks need to make available low-cost financing in the long term so that we are able to build up bigger plants, and we are also able to retain affordable tariffs. Because if the cost of finance is high and the money has to be retained within a very short space of time, it allows then the tariffs to go very high, especially in the first 5 years. So the issue of cost of financing, we have been engaging with our insurance companies. That's why the issue of the use of prescribed asset status, because insurance funds invest over a long time. And we also looking at the country addressing our current risk related to borrowing, where we are working through the Ministry of Finance to come up with debt, addressing the debt issues of the country, so that we can then have more credit lines which are more affordable, including those from some of the multilateral agencies. And the African Development Bank is helping us to come up with a debt restructuring program for the country. Once that is done, we then envisage more access to more affordable financing, targeting the private sector coming from some of these international banks. I think I would like to conclude by saying that the issues related to some of the issues which were raised by the investors in terms of repatriation of funds, that's why we brought in RBZ to then grant these letters of comfort and undertaking. And also, at one time when we started doing these projects, there was an issue with land tenure, where those who wanted to do solar projects were being given leases for 5 years. But the project is a power purchase agreement for them to be able to sell for 25 years. So there was that misalignment. But we are happy to say, Madam Chair, that that has been addressed, and now the new leases, which were for those who are using state land or even private land, are also equated to the same tenure as that of the power purchase agreement. So I think those are the issues which I have sort of covered. I hope you were able to follow me, because I was using my presentation but skipping some of the issues. You can then have a look at them later. So Zera, if you can come in through you, Madam Chair, to just compliment in terms on the regulatory side what we are doing and how you have fared in that area.